right, the record reflects we are back in session. Parties and counsel are present. Our jurors are not yet present. Counsel wanted to address something before we start with the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. We've been given a witness list by defense that includes multiple people that have already testified, and we're just asking defense for an offer of proof as to what they're recalling them for, because most of these witnesses have been subject to extensive cross-examination already. And so I'm just asking for an offer of proof as to what they're going to be called to testify about.
Well, there were some of the witnesses where who did testify. There was an issue about whether or not the defense could then call them as their own witness after cross-examination, and there was an objection by the people to that. So,
today we have Susan Blake and McStay being recalled, and I'm not sure what they're being recalled for because we haven't been given any information. I got emailed a transcript regarding Susan Blake that was available to defense already, so I'm just asking for an offer of proof.
I don't know that they need to make an offer of proof if there's something that's either cumulative or not relevant. You can make your objection.
The only other issue is tomorrow we intend to call Detective Sergeant Bachman. He did a lot of work and wrote a lot of reports. He's inquired of Mr. Hines, I believe, as to what he should review in preparation for his testimony.
Actually, all of them did Steers in part as well.
And Mr. Steers, or Sergeant Steers, I got back to regarding what he needed to review, what I was told he needed to review. But Sergeant Bachman, I don't know what to tell him.
Any specifics as to what those witnesses are going to be testifying to?
I gave some information on what Sergeant Steers will be testifying to. We don't have any further details at this point to what Sergeant Bachman will be testifying to, and we will inform them as soon as we can. But it's not the duty of the defense to give a breakdown of what questions we're going to ask to the people. People made that very clear when we asked for such a highlight when they kept recalling witnesses. I think their words were, we don't have to give you a guide of what we're going to ask. So we had to react. They can react.
Okay, as long as there's a discovery of the material, that's fine.
It's more of a courtesy to Sergeant Bachman, given the voluminous nature of it, so he could know what to be prepared for. So,
Okay. Well, I mean, normally you would expect someone calling a witness to let them know what they're going to inquire about, but if they elect not to do that, I guess that's up to them to do.
it would also avoid wasting the court's time with numerous cumulative and relevance objections. However,
We'll see. As long as there's discovery of the information that's going to be going on, then I don't think they have to go beyond that. Okay, so we're going to bring our jurors in.
Yes, thank you.
All right, the record reflects we are back in session. Parties and counsel are present. All members of our jury and our alternates are present. Good to see everyone back after a weekend. Defense may call your next witness.
Yes, Susan Blake.
We can withdraw her.
Susan R. Blake, S-U-S-A-N, middle initial Renee, R-E-N-E-E,
Blake, B-L-A-K-E.
Okay, we're gonna, examine.
Good afternoon, Ms. Blake.
Good afternoon.
I'll try again. Good afternoon, Ms. Blake.
Good afternoon.
You've already been through this once before up on the stand, so I'm going to try to make it as quick as possible, okay?
Thank you.
There are a couple of areas, though, that I wanted to touch on because either they weren't fully explained or we didn't touch on them at all. And the first issue is a topic that came up about towards the end of 2009, let's say November, December. You had indicated that that's approximate time that your son Joseph had moved into the Fallbrook home. Is that accurate?
Correct.
And when they moved in at that time, the question was posed to you about whether or not at that time Joseph was contemplating getting rid of Chase as a welder or a somebody who would make waterfalls. Do you remember that line of questioning?
I do.
Okay. And I think you indicated, and I could be wrong, and you can correct me if I was wrong, I think you indicated that he was looking for other welders. Was that your testimony?
Correct, at the end of December.
Okay. And that would be 09, right? Going into 2010. Now, you also recall being interviewed in 2014, and you were asked about that. There was an interview by Detective Steers in August of 2014. Do you recall being interviewed by Detective Steers at that time?
Yes.
Okay. And he asked you the same question about whether you were going to get rid of Chase or Dan, or what was the situation regarding Joseph's business as it pertained to Dan and Chase. And do you recall him asking you about that?
Yes.
Do you recall what you told Detective Steers?
Yes.
What did you tell him?
Joey wanted to get a warehouse closer down where he lived in Fallbrook or Vista, so he could be over it with more control. And that he asked me for welders since I'm in the building business. Did I know of anyone? Because he wanted to weed Chase out, and Dan, he was paying off, so he would have been completed also.
So he wanted to, your understanding was he wanted to get rid of Dan, correct?
Yes.
And what about Chase? Did he want to get rid of Chase with other, and replace him with other welders? Was that your understanding?
Exactly.
Or add welders to, and keep Chase and just add additional welders?
He wanted to get rid of him.
Overruled, answer remains.
And do you recall what you told Detective Steers in that regard? Whether he wanted to keep Chase or add to Chase?
Ask me that again.
Yes. Well, let me just ask you this. Do you recall telling, and I'll refer counsel to page 157, and I'm looking at lines 19 through 24. This was actually Detective Hankey at the time asking you questions. And you indicated that, well, I also...
Objection, hearsay, improper foundation. Otherwise, counsel just reading a transcript.
Sure. I'm going to have you take a look at the transcript, okay? And you can feel free to look at any part of it that you want. And you can turn pages, but I've highlighted the relevant portion that I just asked you about. But you can feel free to look at whatever pages you want. Whatever you feel is necessary. Did that refresh your memory as to what you told Detective Hankey?
Yes.
Is it true that you told Detective Hankey that Joseph wanted to get additional welders and add to and keep Chase?
No.
So let's just read it so there's no misunderstanding as to what he said. Well,
Objection lacks foundation for the accuracy of the transcript and it'd be hearsay.
Sustained. You call the witness to for impeachment later if you wish.
I got to now do that.
When you're done with this witness, if you want to call the other witness, you give the interview for impeachment, you can do that.
In that line of questioning, you told Detective Hanky that
Objection, same.
Overruled.
you told Detective Hanky that Joey wanted his own IT guy, right?
That is correct.
And Joseph thought at that point Dan would be gone, correct?
Objection, leading and hearsay.
Overruled.
I'm not sure when Dan would have been gone.
But that's what you told Detective Hanky.
Yes, he was peeing him off.
And you also told Detective Hanky that he'd still have Chase and the welders and everybody in one spot.
Objection, hearsay lacks foundation.
Overruled.
Is that what you told him?
Yes.
And what you meant by that was Joey's vision of having one warehouse would include Chase and the other welders. correct?
Objection, leading.
Overruled.
That's what he talked about.
Detective Hanky actually began to end an interview specifically about whether or not Joseph wanted Chase out. And that's page 158, lines 6 through 15. Okay, I'm going to have you review that section and feel free to look before and after. That was, I've highlighted your answers. You can look there at whatever point you want.
Sorry, where are you at, counsel?
Page 158.
Okay.
Is everybody in line?
Yes.
So Detective Hanky asked you specifically whether or not Joey wanted a new builder or welder, right?
Yes, he asked me about welders.
And you indicated that you answered no. He didn't say much about Chase.
Objection,
He did Chase out.
reading, hearsay lacks foundation for the accuracy of the transcript he's reading.
Overruled.
He wanted to get more Dan out, right?
Yeah, Dan first, yes.
Because Dan acted as if he could just flip the switch and shut his whole business down.
Correct.
Objection, leading, hearsay.
Overruled.
And Joey couldn't get it back up, and this and that. So his concern was to buy him out, and he's told me this, Joey, and then start over.
Objection, is there a question or is counsel just reading the transcript?
Sustained.
In other words, you knew about Dan's threat to shut down the business.
Objection calls for hearsay speculation.
Calls
To strike counsel's
calls for hearsay and speculation and conclusion.
Wow. Sorry.
Your Honor, that also
It is
violates.
a lie,
I
and it's
apologize.
also improper, Mr. Mullane.
Your Honor, may we approach? May we approach, Your Honor?
Now, if you have other proper questions to ask, you can ask them.
Thank you. You knew that Joseph wanted to buy Dan out, right? You knew that.
Yes.
And did you know the reason why he wanted to buy Dan out?
He wanted to have an IT guy in his warehouse where he would have full control over it.
Was there a specific reason why he didn't want to take Dan with him into the warehouse?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained is praised.
Do you know why Joseph didn't want to take Dan with him and wanted to buy him out instead?
I don't know why.
Did you tell Detective Hanky that it was because Dan had threatened to shut the business down?
Objection, improper, violation, eliminate.
Sustained.
ask you about the relationship that you understood existed between Joseph and Summer at the time that they disappeared. Because you indicated to Detective Steers that Joseph confided to you.
Objection, leading hearsay.
It's foundational, Your Honor.
Well, indicated the objection sustained, you can ask whatever it is you want to ask about. And if there's something to impeach with, you can ask about that.
Did you know the status of Summer and Joseph's relationship in February of 2010?
What do you mean status?
Well, were they doing good? Was their marriage good? Was their marriage bad?
Objection and relevance.
Sustained.
When you testified previously, you were asked about some checks that you wrote to Chase. Do you recall that?
Yes.
You wrote some checks from your personal account,
Correct?
and it totaled about $5,000, correct?
Correct.
And you also testified that of that $5,000 that you had given to Chase, that you did not see any reimbursement. Is that correct?
Correct.
You were also asked about a bank account that was opened in March of 2010 after Joseph disappeared. You recall that?
Yes.
And that was a bank account at Chase Bank, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And did you remember that account?
Yes.
And I showed you a $3,300 check that was written to Chase and it had been returned. You recall that?
Objection, this state's testimony.
I'd have to see that check.
Sure.
I don't remember.
I'll show you that in a minute. But you were a signer on the account, correct?
Yes.
Did you receive money from that account?
Not that I know of.
And I'm going to show you what's been marked as $985. I'm going to bring a copy up to you, but I'm also going to put it on the screen. If you could just identify this as the actions and bank account, okay?
What's on that?
No, it's just if you could just look at the account here and check that.
Yes.
And do you recall when you opened that?
Saying March 16th.
Was that an account that you opened with your son, Michael?
Yes, my son.
And I'm just having you really quick flip to the end here, and then give you the signature card, right? If you could take a look at that signature card on that account, and you can just identify the signature that is.
That is mine on March 23rd.
Okay, so you were added on March 23rd, I guess?
Yes.
Okay. And your son is there, your son's signature is there as well?
Yes, on April 22nd, I think.
Do you know how long the account was open for?
Maybe 2.5 months when I stopped.
Okay. That's fine. I just wanted that you identify the account as yours, and you recognize it, correct?
Yes, yes.
I'm going to show you page 36 of those statements. I'm going to go ahead and put it up on the screen.
Basically, actual exhibit.
We'll start with the $3,300 check.
Okay.
Do you recall that check?
What exhibit is this?
This is the same exhibit. It's all part of, you have it right now, so it's on the back of that.
I see the check, yes.
Okay. So now, do you remember when I asked you about this before?
Yes.
Okay. And this check was actually returned, as far as you remember, correct?
Objection, misstates testimony foundation.
I don't know if it was returned.
Okay. We're going to get to it anyway, but you do recall me asking you about that, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this is one check, at least, that you did write to, from that account to Charles Mary, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to ask, we can go to page 30. Oh, wait. Yeah, page, start with page 30. You see that, Ms. Blake?
Yes.
If we can blow that up. Is that a check that you wrote? Do you recognize that? Okay. And that's a check dated March 31st, 2010,
Yes.
and for $350, is that correct?
Yes.
And it's made out to you, correct?
Correct.
Do you know what that was for?
I wish I had wrote in the memo area.
Okay. How about page 27? You recognize that?
Yes.
Is that your signature, correct? Oh, no, that's not your signature.
No.
Whose signature is that?
My son Mikey.
And it's a check made to you?
Yes.
And do you remember him giving you that?
No.
Okay. Do you remember depositing it?
I don't know if I deposited it
Okay.
into
Do you know what that was
that
for?
account.
Do you know what that was for?
Is that when the account was opened?
That date is March 20th? Is that what it looks like to you?
Yes.
Okay. So that's a check for $500. There is something in the memo line, correct?
It's just funds transferred.
Okay. So do you recall getting that check?
I obviously, yes.
Okay. Do you know what that was for?
I don't.
Okay. So let's go to page 31. See if we can blow that up. So that looks like a withdrawal slip, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you know whose name, signature that is?
It's my signature.
And that's for $5,500, correct?
Yes, but that's not my signature on top.
Okay. Whose initials are right next to the $5,500?
My initials.
Okay. Remember cashing that or withdrawing that money?
I don't.
Okay. So you wouldn't know what you did with it then, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So let's go to page 32. You see that now?
Yes.
That's another withdrawal.
Yes.
Okay. And that's a withdrawal for Susan Blake, is that correct?
Correct.
And that's your initials again by the 4,000.
Correct.
And do you recall withdrawing that $4,000?
I don't recall it. I don't know if this was for parts or what this was for.
Okay. But I guess my question is, my first question is, do you recall withdrawing the $4,000?
By this, yes.
Okay. Second question, what did you do with the $4,000?
Would have been used for the business.
Do you know who you gave it to?
I don't remember that far back.
Who, did you ever give any parts supplier, other than Chase, any money to build waterfalls or water fountains?
Yes,
Who did you give money to?
shipping,
For shipping?
for shipping.
Okay. Do you recall who you gave the money for shipping?
I think it was called Comcast.
Okay. You did that one time, right?
I don't remember.
Do you know how much you gave them?
I do not.
Was it about $250?
I don't know.
Okay. So you don't know what the $4,000 was used for here?
Correct.
That's an answer.
Okay, let's go to the page 33. Okay, we'll start with check 1002. Do you see that now?
I do.
It's dated April 6th.
Correct.
Who's that check made out to?
It's made out to me.
Okay. And for $2,500?
Correct.
Okay. And who's it signed by?
Me.
Okay. And do you recall writing that check to yourself?
Yes.
And in fact, there is a signature on the back of the check, correct? You recognize that?
Yes.
Whose is that?
My signature.
And you deposited that in your bank?
I don't know where it was deposited.
Okay. Do you know what you did with this money?
I do not.
Okay. Let's go to the next check on that same page 33. It's check number 1003. Do you see that now?
Yes.
What date is that check?
April 9th,
Okay. And how much is that for?
$3,300.
And it's written to Susan Blake,
Correct.
and it's signed by Susan Blake. Do you know what you did with that money now?
I don't.
Let's go to page 35. Go to check 1005. You see that now?
I do.
The check dated April 12th
Yes.
for $3,000.
Correct.
And you gave that to Dan Kavanaugh.
Yes.
And do you know what you gave it to Dan Kavanaugh for?
The business.
What do you mean the business? What was he doing that he needed $3,000?
I don't know if it was money he gave us or if it was for IT. I don't know.
Well, this isn't money he would give giving you.
Objection, argumentative, leading.
On this check, this is you giving him money, correct?
Correct.
And you don't recognize, you don't remember what you gave him the money for, correct?
No.
Okay. Go to page 39. Check 1011. It's April 27th. Check written to Susan Blake, correct?
Correct.
$1,500,
Correct.
and you signed it.
Correct.
And if you look on the back, you deposited that check, correct?
Correct.
Do you know what this was for?
I don't. I don't know if this is money I gave Chase or not after they were cashed.
Fair enough. Go to page 41. The bottom check, 1015. You see that now?
Yes.
Dated May 6th. Check
Yes.
for $1,000.
Yes.
Payable to you and written by you, correct?
Correct.
And it says for Dan.
Obviously it went to Dan.
Okay. So do you know why you would have given Dan this $1,000?
For which fountain, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. Now, your understanding at the time, Dan was not building any fountains, correct?
Objection, E.
No, he was not building.
We're going to go to page 44. Uh, 1020, check number 1020 on page 44.
Yes.
You recognize that?
Yes,
And that's another check written to yourself, signed by yourself
yes,
for $1,800.
yes,
And again, in the memo line, it says for Dan.
yes,
Do you know what that was for?
no,
Checks, page 45, check number 1013.
yes,
You recall writing that check?
yes,
And that was to Heather Martin.
yes.
Who is Heather Martin?
My grandson Jonah's mother, it was for child support.
Okay. And that was for $500, correct, on May 4th?
Yes,
So, we go to the statement portion of this exhibit. We can go to page 7. We can blow that up a little. You see what the section that says ATM and debit card withdrawals?
yes,
Okay. You see in the one of the first lines where it says card purchase? Dated
Yes.
April 5th? You see that?
yes,
So it looks like, do you recall going, looks like, to the passport office in Los Angeles and using a card to make some purchase there?
no, I never activated the card.
Okay. So if you look at the line above it on April 2nd, it says ATM withdrawal, Wilshire Boulevard, Los Angeles.
And those aren't mine.
Who else had a card?
Mikey may have had a card.
Okay. So, but you didn't do that withdrawal in Los Angeles, correct?
Correct.
Okay. If we go to April 5th, looks like there's a card purchase. It says Giggles and Hugs. And I'll have to admit, I don't know what that is, so I'll ask you if you do.
I don't know either. It's not my purchase.
Okay. So you wouldn't have made that?
No,
Okay. Below that, another purchase at Giggles and Hugs?
no,
Okay. What about on April 5th, it looks like there's a gas purchase of $40 at Chevron in Newport Beach?
not mine.
Okay.
Object Foundation in terms of the withdrawals, Your Honor.
There's some other withdrawals there. If you look at those card purchases, there's only a few more. Were any of those yours?
None.
And if you see there's a Sprint payment right here. You see that?
Yes.
That you didn't have Sprint, did you?
No.
Who had Sprint?
I don't know. My company pays for my phones.
Okay, so that could potentially be your son as well.
It's not mine.
Objection, speculation.
But none of those card purchases were yours, correct?
Correct.
So when I asked you, when you first testified, whether or not you gave your bank records to the detectives, you told me that you had given them your bank records. Do you recall that?
You mean my copies?
Your copies, and you gave them your bank information, correct?
Gave them the yes.
In fact, you had a lot of different bank accounts, correct? Especially at Wells Fargo.
Objection, meaning, relevance.
Is that correct?
Of my accounts?
Yes.
I had one at Wells Fargo.
You had one account at Wells Fargo?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, so did you give the detectives these bank records or information about the Chase bank account?
Objection, asked and answered in foundation.
Overruled.
Yes, I gave all the information to the detectives.
Do you know which detective you gave this information to on the Chase Bank?
I want to say DeGaulle.
Now, when I asked you more than one time, on the last time that you testified, and even again before you started this morning, if you had ever taken money out of that account, and your answer was that you had not. You recall that?
Yes?
Okay, you've seen these checks. I totaled them, and the total of the checks comes to $20,450. We saw that 2 of them were for Dan, and so we can take the $2,800 from that, but the rest were made to you, and you don't have an answer as to what you did with that money. Is that correct?
Objection argumented. Answered.
That money would have went back to Chase or everything towards the business.
Okay. Well, it's funny you mention that, because in this statement, there's several checks made to Chase for
Objection
waterfalls,
argumentative
correct?
isn't funny, you should
Sustained argumentative.
Well, there were several checks written to Chase to complete waterfall projects
Yes?
from this account.
Objection foundation.
Overruled.
You remember that, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, if you're writing checks to Chase, you wouldn't then cash a check and then give him cash, would you?
Objection argumentative.
Overruled.
Yes, I have given him cash.
So, you understood that when a waterfall is ordered, a custom waterfall is ordered, that the money that customers send you as a deposit is usually 50%. That was your understanding, correct?
Objection leading and speculation.
Overruled, she can answer if she knows.
I don't know what their agreements were.
You do know, though, whatever money they send you initially,
Objection argumentative.
Overruled.
you do know that that money has to be used then to go buy materials and supplies so the waterfall can be built. You know that, you knew that, correct?
Yes?
Okay. So if you're taking out that money, okay, and it's not going towards materials and supplies to make the waterfall, there's going to be a problem with waterfalls getting completed. Would you agree?
Objection misstates the testimony and argumentative.
An objection sustained as assuming facts not in evidence.
You don't recall giving any of the money that I just showed you on the checks that you took out. You don't recall giving any of that money except for the shipping company. You don't recall giving any supplier any of those funds, correct?
I think it was FedEx or UPS. Yes, there was some money there too.
Aside from the shipping company and FedEx, you didn't give any fountain builder any money, did you? Other than Chase?
Correct.
So, would you agree that if you're taking the customer deposits and you're not giving the money to a builder to build it, that that could lead to a potential problem?
Objection leading.
And assumes facts not in evidence.
Objection sustained as assuming facts not in evidence.
Did you tell customers when they called for their waterfalls that Chase was the one responsible for building the waterfall?
I don't remember my conversations with any of the fountain people.
You said that you got calls from different people though, right?
Correct.
And when they called and said, "Where's my waterfall?" you told them that Chase is the one that's responsible to build it, right?
Objection assumes facts not in evidence that such a call was made.
Overruled, she can answer.
I would ask Chase, yes.
I'm asking what you told the customers.
I don't remember exactly what I told the customers. We were trying to keep them calm.
You do recall that Chase went to Saudi Arabia and he finished the Saudi Arabian waterfall, correct?
I never
Objection
received
leading and foundation.
Overruled, she can answer if she knows.
I never received confirmation on that. I did tell Chase those funds need to go back into the bank of Joey's.
Okay. And do you recall that when Chase was in Saudi Arabia, that he sent you an email?
Not from Saudi, I don't know.
You have to take a look at it, Exhibit 990. Read that. Let me try to correct you.
I don't remember this. Is this the same date?
Look at the issue on the bottom.
I don't remember ever seeing this.
So you don't recall these emails?
No.
There was some questions asked of you regarding the payment from Saudi Arabia. You recall that?
Yes.
And you indicated that Chase, your understanding was Chase got the money. I think you said it was like 16 or 17,000.
Objection, misstates testimony.
Overruled, she can answer if that's correct.
Isn't that what you testified to?
I don't know what the exact amount was.
But you indicated that Chase had received that money and you didn't, and then they asked you if any of that money was ever given to you. Do you recall that?
Objection, asked and answered. This was covered during her first testimony, Your Honor.
Overruled, she can answer.
I never knew that he completed the job or received the funds, but that the funds should have went back, all of it, into Joey's account.
Okay. But do you recall Ms. Rodriguez asking you when the money came in to Chase, did you get any of that money? Do you recall her asking you that?
I didn't receive any money, any funds.
Right. Okay. I'm going to show you. We already have previous mark.
I'm objecting as to the foundation of this. This has already been covered, and we've already objected to the foundation on this.
It hasn't been covered, Your Honor.
Um,
Approach, Your Honor.
Sure, Council approach. You ready? Last objection is sustained on both hearsay and lack of foundation.
Ms. Blake, do you know whether or not Dan Kavanaugh was receiving payments on behalf of Earth-inspired products?
Objection, foundation, speculation.
Overruled, she can answer if she knows.
Repeat the question.
Yes. Do you know whether or not Dan Kavanaugh was receiving payments from various customers on behalf of Earth-inspired products?
I have no idea what he received.
Do you recall, I apologize for that. I had a little bird whispering in my ear. So, do you know, well, you were asked the questions about the time that you went into the house, Joey's house, and you were cleaning up. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Correct.
And I think the date you indicated you went into the house and cleaned up was on February 16th. Is that right?
Object as to cumulative asked and answered.
I'm assuming this is foundation also overruled.
I'm not sure of the right date.
Do you recall if it was, you remember being interviewed in the detective's vehicle that night at Joey's house, right?
Correct.
And that was on February 15th.
Correct.
And you recall going back the next day and cleaning up, and you were with Blanche, Aranda, and Kathy Sanchez.
Objection, misstates the testimony.
Overruled, she can recall if that's correct.
I don't recall it being the next day.
Okay, but at some point.
Correct.
All right. And do you recall telling Kathy Sanchez that at that time you did not believe that the family was coming back?
Objection, leading and proper hearsay, relevance.
Well, objection sustained on relevance as to what she may have said.
Will you be heard on that?
There's a request to be heard on that, Your Honor.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sure, counsel approach.
Bless you.
All right, the last objection is sustained on both relevance, grounds, and evidence code 352.
Do you recall, Ms. Blake? Oh, wait, 1 minute. Okay. Do you recall, Ms. Blake, when you went back to clean with Ms. Aranda and Ms. Sanchez, that you guys ate lunch there?
Yes,
And do you recall having a conversation and telling Kathy Sanchez that that you were going to wash the
Objection, leading.
futon covers?
Objection,
Well,
leading.
what she may have told Ms. Sanchez is irrelevant, so objection sustained on relevancy grounds.
Did you wash the futon covers upstairs?
I did not.
Did you tell Ms. Sanchez that you did?
No,
Did you tell Ms. Sanchez that the futon covers were dirty?
no.
Were they dirty?
There was all the futon covers.
Do you recall Ms. Sanchez trying to put the futon covers back on the futons after they were washed?
Objection
Absolutely.
assumes facts not evidence that they were washed.
Sustained.
Do you recall Ms. Sanchez trying to put the futon covers on?
She did not.
And do you recall Ms. Sanchez having difficulty putting the futon covers on after they were dried because they were too tight?
Objection assumes facts not evidence and lacks foundation based on the objection.
And
There were some questions about a table, a round table that was in Joey's house. Do you recall those questions?
The round table, yes.
Okay. On that round table, regarding that round table, was that originally your table?
No, Joey's.
That was Joey's table?
No.
Do you recall telling the detective that you gave that table to one of your friend's sons?
Correct.
And that would have been David Alessi?
Correct.
And do you recall when you gave that table to David Alessi?
It was in my garage, I believe, for a while, and so I'm going to say in 2000, and he was building a property in Malibu. So it was either the winter of 2010 or the beginning of 2011.
And did you ever talk about that table with Mr. Alessi after you gave it to him?
Objection, relevance.
sustained.
Do you know what Mr. Alessi did with the table?
Objection, relevance.
Overruled, should answer if she knows.
Yes, he's had a manufactured home on his property that he was not permitted to have. So he had sold it.
He sold the table?
It's all of his furniture that was in it and the manufactured home.
Okay. Now, just getting back to the checks that I showed you, and the checks that were made out to you, I wanted to ask you, at some point you testified, and quite frankly, I don't remember whether it was Ms. Rodriguez asking you questions or myself the last time, but you did mention that your son's home went into foreclosure. Do you recall that?
Yes, it was going in foreclosure.
And I think you indicated that because the automatic payments or the bank froze the account or something like that, therefore the automatic payments were not being made.
Correct.
Do I have that right?
As far as I understood, yes.
Okay. Now, is there any reason why you did not make some of the payments to keep the house afloat, so maybe it could be sold?
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
Was there ever a reward offer?
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
Of the money that we listed out, that I listed out and showed you those checks, did you give any of that money to your son, Michael?
No.
Okay, good. Thank you. Oh, wait. hang on. Back to the table, sorry. When did you take possession of the table? Before you gave it to Mr. Alessi?
It would be, I'm going to say July. End of July, possibly August.
Of 2020?
Correct.
And
End.
when you took possession of it, did you notice anything on the table? Any blood or anything like that?
I never really noticed.
And you told that to the detectives, correct?
I don't know if they asked me about the table at my house.
Date stamps 28857. Here that you did not notice any blood or anything here on the table when you took possession.
Correct.
The lunch that I asked you about that you had when you ate lunch with Ms. Sanchez and Ms. Aranda at the house, that was on that table, correct? That round table?
Yes.
Nothing further.
Anything on cross?
Yes, perhaps you can let me borrow this paper that you just had. Showing you that same exhibit, page 28, 857. Defense counsel asked you specifically if you noticed any blood or anything on the tables. If you can read the next line that's not highlighted.
Objection is the foundation as to what's in the report, actually.
Sustained, you can ask her if that
Sure.
refreshes her recollection and then ask her specifically about it.
Do you recall telling the detective that you knew that the tables had also been cleaned at the date that you sat down and had lunch with them?
I don't recall, but
If you could read this very next line right here and see if that was right. If that would refresh your recollection.
in July, when the house was packed up, I wasn't there for that.
Okay, but does it indicate to you that you knew that the tables had been cleaned before you took possession of them?
No.
Read that again, then. You can just read that full paragraph. Okay, you had lunch at that table, correct?
Correct.
And that table had been cleaned at the point that you sat down and had lunch at it, right?
Correct.
Objection is the foundation.
Overruled.
Now, you were asked a series of questions about a bank account that was opened at Chase Bank. Do you recall that?
Correct.
Thank you. And you were asked specifically about checks involving denominations or checks that you had written to yourself. Do you recall that?
Correct.
And when you opened this account was opened in March, I believe you said, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that would have been after your son went missing, right?
Correct.
And at the time, you were also just asked some questions about not making house payments and things like that. to your knowledge, was the other account that your son had, Mr. McStay, Joey, the account that he had at Union Bank was frozen, correct?
Objection, foundation.
Overruled, it was covered under,
Yes, I was told it was frozen.
So there was no way to access any funds from that account to keep the business running, right?
Correct.
And so this account was opened to keep the business running, right?
Correct.
Because you wanted to try to keep the business afloat, right?
Correct.
And prior to them going missing, you didn't really have any role in running Earth Inspired Products, right?
Correct.
This was your son's business completely, right?
Yes.
Okay, and so after they went missing, you were kind of pushed into that role, right?
Yes.
And so prior to that, you weren't really up to speed on any of the financials relating to the business, right?
Correct.
And you were asked a lot of questions about this account, and it was only open for a couple of months back in 2010, right?
Yes.
And would it be fair to say that when this account was opened, that was a fairly traumatic time period for you?
Most definitely.
Your entire family, with respect to Joseph, Summer, and the 2 kids were missing, right?
That's correct.
And would you agree that that was by far the most difficult thing that you've ever had to deal with in your life?
The worst, devastating.
And so during that time, when you're experiencing this extreme devastation, you're trying to run a business and keep a business afloat for your son, right?
Trying.
Now, defendant came to see you at your home on February 9th. Do you recall testifying about that?
Yes.
Were you aware of the fact that the defendant had written checks from the Union Bank account to himself on February 8th and backdated them to February 4th?
Your objection is relative.
sustained.
Did you ever have an opportunity to review any of the QuickBook records related to your son's account?
Objection,
No.
relative.
The answer no remains.
Do you have any knowledge about the defendant writing checks to himself?
No.
To your knowledge, did the defendant have access to Joe's bank accounts?
He did not.
Your Honor, this whole line is objection to relevance and foundation.
The objection sustained on foundation and calls for speculation and conclusion. The last answer is stricken.
Well, the defendant came to you on February 9th and talked to you about the fact that he needed money, right?
Yes.
And he was telling you that he needed money to complete jobs because he couldn't get a hold of Joe, right?
Correct.
And you had several conversations with him over the next several months about him needing money, right?
Correct.
So going into Exhibit 985, let's look at the checks that you wrote to the defendant that you weren't asked about on your direct examination. Because previously you testified, if you recall, that you had given the defendant about $5,000, right?
Yes, plus.
And so let's go into that particular exhibit. And let's look at page 34.
What exhibit is this?
This is 985, Your Honor. Let's look at page 34. Is this a check that you wrote to the defendant?
Yes.
And this was not a check that you testified about previously, is that correct?
Correct.
And this check was written on April 12th, correct?
Yes.
And then showing you page 35 of the bottom of that, or the top of that, this is another check that you wrote to the defendant on April 12th for $400, right?
Yes.
And then you were asked specifically about check 30, on page 36. This is another check on April 12th for $3,300. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And this was a check that you had testified about previously because we see the endorsement canceled stamp on there. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And then this we see is check 1004, right?
Yes,
And this was in April, correct?
yes,
And then we see another check that you wrote to the defendant on page 37 of that same exhibit. This was for $1,300 on April 16th, correct?
yes,
And then again, we see another check on the bottom of page 39 for $400 to the defendant. Do you see that?
yes,
And then on the top of page 41, we see another check that you wrote to the defendant on May 4th for $1,600, correct?
yes.
And do you know whether the defendant had a bank account at this time?
I thought he had one at Bank of America.
Did you know how long that account was open?
I have no idea his account.
Were there times that you indicated, I think, that you gave him cash for things?
Correct.
And going on to page 42 of that same exhibit, this is another check that you wrote to the defendant on May 7th for $2,800, correct?
Correct.
And we see a thumbprint on that check, right? You see that in the middle of the check?
Yes,
And then going on to another check that you wrote the defendant on page 43 of that same exhibit for $2,000. Do you see that?
yes,
And that was on May 7th of 2010.
yes,
And then right underneath that, we see yet another check written to the defendant on May 7th for $1,200, right?
yes.
Do you know how much those checks total?
I do not.
And well, previously you testified that you believed that you gave the defendant about $5,000, right? And this total is now $15,900. So it seems you gave him a significant amount more of money than you believed you did, right?
Correct.
And this was not this account was only open, as we see, for a couple of months, right?
Yes,
When you met with the defendant, those conversations seemed to center primarily about him needing money, right?
yes,
And it wasn't necessarily, or didn't appear to be, any concern about where Joe or the family was, right?
correct.
Objection, foundation argumentative.
And to your knowledge, the reason that the defendant didn't have access to the bank accounts was because Joey had paid off some gambling debts for him, right?
Objection,
Correct.
foundation, Your Honor.
This then,
Move
lack
to
of
strike.
foundation and calls for speculation and conclusion.
Well, you testified,
Your Honor, move to strike.
If there was an answer, it's stricken, the jury's instructed to disregard the last answer.
you testified previously in this case. Do you recall that?
Yes,
And you specifically were asked about the defendant and his gambling habits. Do you recall that?
yes,
No, objected to foundation for line of questioning.
Sustained as cumulative as to going over what you previously testified to in that regard.
How would you know if a fountain was completed? If the defendant had actually completed a fountain that he had taken money from you for.
he would take a picture of it completed.
And based on that, you believed that they were completed, correct?
I only know of one completed.
Go ahead and take our, after you recess this time, about 10 minutes, we'll take a little bit shorter recess because we're going to be recessing at about 3:45. One of the jurors needed to leave a little bit early today, so we'll just take a short recess.